telling the story of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper working towards the liberation of enslaved people in the years before the Civil War, we know how the story will end. We know in her story that when Congress passes the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, 10 years before Civil War, 20 years before the 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote to all people born here, we know how the story is going to end. We know that the enslavers were on the wrong side of history. We know it wouldn't go on forever. But in 1854, when Frances began to crisscross New England speaking against slavery, she did not know how or when the story would unfold. She didn't know what was coming. She only knew to stay faithful to her values. She knew that it mattered to speak out, that it mattered to tell the stories of enslaved people. It mattered to help white America remember that they were human beings. Manhood, she wrote, meaning humanity, has learned its dignity and worth, she said once. And once known, once you know that about humanity, once you know that the human person has that just by virtue of being a human being, it's hard to forget that. Even without knowing where the story would end or when or how, it mattered for her to say then and there, this is not right. Her gravestone gives her names and dates: Harper, Frances Ellen Watkins, September 24th, 1825 to February 20th, 1911, novelist, poet, abolitionist, Unitarian. And then it lists on the stone, it lists a line from a poem of hers from 1858. The stanza reads like this. It says, "I ask no monument proud and high to arrest the gaze of passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves." Those same words are on the wall of the contemplative court at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. There's a photo of one angle of it up on the screen here. I haven't been there. Some of you have. But one person who visited writes that it's a gorgeous room, the space with these caramel bronze walls of glass with a core of luminous mesh. There's a balance between opacity and translucency, and it looks as if light is shining inside them. There's a cylindrical fountain, you can see a piece of it in the center of the room coming down from a skylight above, and the water creates a sound that conveys something in between a feeling of white noise and calming relaxation. Some visitors come here and sing. Others sit quietly staring at this constantly shifting liquid pool. It's a space for deep thoughts, for meditation, for making sense of everything you've seen. That museum, at least before its stories began to be revised this year, is a place to hold the whole honest story of this country, of enslavement, of the long and continuing and continuous struggle for freedom, which did not stop when slavery ended. And when they designed the museum, the designers, the curators, the architects understood well that it wasn't just a place for learning. It wasn't just a space to acquire information and data. It was a place for feeling. It was a place for being moved. And that we would need, each of us, everyone who visited that house, space and time and quiet community to feel their way into the future. On the wall across from Watkins Harper's lines of poetry is this one that we see, words from Martin Luther King Jr. "We are determined," he says, "to work and fight until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." He's quoting the biblical prophet Amos, calling for justice in the 7th century BC. Amos wanted his people to understand 2,700 years ago, like Dr. King did, that private prayers and personal holiness were not more important to God than making the world just here and now. Amos wrote, imagining the viewpoint of God. He wrote these lines in God's mouth in his book. He says, I spurn your festivals and smell no fragrance in your convocations. Should you offer up to me burnt offerings or grain offerings, I will not accept them, nor will I look on the well-being sacrifice of your fattened calves. Take away from me the noise of your singers. And look, the rituals themselves that he's naming are different, but what he's saying is the outward forms of being religious, of showing up and doing the right things at the right times, of saying the right prayers in the right ways, Amos says, God doesn't care about any of that. Take away from me the noise of your singers, nor will I listen to the melody of your lutes, but let justice well up like water, and righteousness like a steady stream. The words you say, he means, the words you say, the songs you sing, all of that, fine, but without actually reshaping this world into a place that's just and fair, why would God care, he says 2,700 years ago. Let justice well up like water and righteousness like a steady stream. Maybe Amos does have in mind those flood moments when a tidal wave of justice rises up. Those times happen, they come. But maybe also Amos is thinking of those little desert streams in the mountains. Maybe he's thinking about how those streams make change slowly. And maybe his invitation is not to feel that you've failed if you haven't been part of that tidal wave of justice, but instead to be part of a stream, a steady stream, steady wearing and grinding and cutting through granite over millennia. You've seen the mountain streams which have cut canyons 1/100th of a millimeter at a time. You've seen boulders worn smooth by 100 million grains of sand brushing them. You've seen rivers carve a path through mountains where there was no path. Let justice well up like water and righteousness like a steady stream. Maybe justice wells up all at once, but maybe it is that steady stream working day after day. When we tell the story of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper in the years before the Civil War, it's such a neat story. It's got a beginning and a middle and an end that pays off the beginning. Born free in a slave state, committed passionately to the anti-slavery cause, 1865 and freedom. Great. Done, right? It's neat. That's a movie right there. Roll credits. But the story doesn't ever end. It doesn't end. She was 40 years old in 1865 and would spend the next 40 years of her life fighting no less steadily, working no less steadily. During Reconstruction, she was an activist for civil rights and women's rights and education. She said all of those things go together. All of them go together. And she watched as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, champions of women's suffrage, condemned the 15th Amendment, giving black men the right to vote, in overtly racist tones. Stanton and Susan B. Anthony said, why should lesser black men be given the right to vote before superior white women? Frances had already answered that question. In May of 1866, she delivered an address to the National Women's Rights Convention in New York, saying before thousands, justice is not fulfilled so long as women are unequal before the law, and We are all bound together. We, she said to a room of men and women of many races, we are all bound together in one great bundle of humanity. And society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse on its own soul. We're all bound together. Everyone counts. Everyone matters. Everyone is possessed of an inherent worth and dignity. And once that's felt, once you've seen that, it can be avoided, but you don't unsee that. The humanity of a person doesn't get partitioned off into narrow categories or hierarchies of importance. Every part of a person counts and matters. America, Dr. King would write a century later, America is basically a dream yet unfulfilled. It is a dream of a nation founded on certain basic principles. And the substance, he says, the substance of that dream is found in these sublime words. Namely, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men, all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It says, Dr. King continued, in such a profound eloquence and unequivocal language, the dignity and the worth of the human person, period. The American dream reminds us every one of us is heir to the legacy of dignity. This is a great dream, a dream as of yet unfulfilled. I spent this last week with 40 Unitarian Universalist ministers gathered at an old lodge from the 1930s on the banks of the Missouri River, north of St. Louis. Just as that group's done for 74 years. One of these old, WPA-era lodges with dark walls and the huge beams made out of tree trunks and green leather chairs in front of a fireplace taller than me and a flagstone patio above a wide green lawn falling away to the river and the oaks and the maples there still with their leaves. Our topic this year in that group was resisting authoritarianism. What does it look like? What does it mean? What are we called to do in this moment? How do we survive the work? And I listened and listened and listened and took notes and drew to keep my hands busy while my monkey mind tried to stay focused. And I caught up with old friends and former students and senior colleagues. But here's the thing. Of all the analysis and books and articles and commentary and discussion, what stays with me the sharpest is this one story that I heard from a minister friend living in Oak Park, Illinois, just west of Chicago. Oak Park, it's an affluent, growing suburb of tree-lined streets, a dozen Frank Lloyd Wright houses. It's this beautiful Midwestern place. And my friend told me about walking his dog 2 weeks ago, first thing in the morning, just a little after sunrise, and witnessing a disappearance. That is to say, watching helpless as masked armed officers pulled a woman into a van down the street ahead of him and closed the door and drove away. It was quiet, he said. There was no one else out on the street. It was early, just down the block, on an ordinary, unremarkable morning. Secret police who did not identify themselves or the agency they were a part of, or their names, or the charges for which they were detaining this woman, or the destination to which she would be taken. Secret police abducted someone from the tree-lined streets of an affluent suburb. And my friend said he was frozen. His whiteness, his maleness, his age, his authority, none of that would stop him if they decided to arrest him, to beat him up. And it was Fast, he said, so fast. In the quiet of the street afterwards, he called the local group coordinating reports of ICE raids and let them know. This is not normal. This is not normal. This is not normal. At a protest in October, I saw a sign which read, "One day, everyone will have been against this." This is not normal. It may be legal, but it is not right. We are bound up together in one great bundle of humanity. And society cannot trample on the weakest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. The choice, make no mistake, to send secret police to Oak Park, Illinois instead of Boulder, Colorado is an arbitrary flip of the coin. It's happening here already in Colorado, in plain sight. The political theorist Hannah Arendt, born in Germany in 1906, wrote this of the rising tide of repression of totalitarianism in her country in the 20s and 30s. She said, all of this, everything, all of it took place in public. There was nothing secret or mysterious about it. And still, it was by no means visible to all. For until that very moment when catastrophe overtook everything and everybody, it was covered up not by realities, but by the highly efficient talk and double talk of nearly all official representatives who, without interruption and in many ingenious variations, explained away unpleasant facts and justified concerns. America is essentially a dream unfulfilled. And we tell and retell the stories of our ancestors who worked for liberation in the past because we do not know how and when our story will end. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper did not know what the outcome would be, but she knew that it mattered nonetheless. To be that steady stream, cutting a channel, cutting a way where there was no way. Finding a path forward towards the future, towards the realization of that dream, following it, despite everything that happened around her. Let justice well up like water, and righteousness like a steady stream. We do that steady work, and justice will well up. The poet Seamus Heaney writes this. He says, human beings suffer. Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong inflicted and endured. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a farther shore is reachable from here. Amen.